Let's talk about what happened over the weekend with Prigozhin's great escape. Essentially, his grand, what they're calling it is the Wagner Group rebellion. And I actually think that this was a giant extortion plot. And I'm going to walk you through why I believe that this was not an uprising of Prigozhin really truly trying to take over the Russian government. I don't think that there was some rebellion or really uprising. I think this was a great extortion plot, and I think it was well crafted and it was risky, but I think it obviously paid off for Prigozhin, and we're going to go into all of that tonight here on the show. So let's start off with Prigozhin has now come out with a statement. So first of all, what we saw on was it Saturday? I feel like my days are getting, and what day was it in Russia? But we woke up to the news that Russia was essentially under attack by its own mercenary force, the Wagner Group, and that the Wagner Group had taken over Rostov, which is the special military operation headquarters, which is right outside of the borders of Donbass, and that they had then made their way. They took over that city, and they had made their way up, and they were headed towards Moscow, and they were about 200 kilometers from Moscow before ultimately they stopped and turned around and ended up in Belarus. What was interesting about this, of course, is all of the mainstream media was going absolutely nuts, saying this is it for Putin. Prigozhin is coming, and there's a coup going on in Russia. And this was what was on the news: was there's a giant coup, and this definitely did look pretty freaky. And a lot of my sources in Russia, who are anything from political people and pundits that you might see or commentators that you might see to just average Russians who I know, who I've made friends with, who are not political, who have nothing to do with politics. They don't care about politics. And the average Russian was saying that this was insane. It was crazy. They live in Moscow, and they were saying that they could still go about their day. Maybe there was some sort of advisory to be more cautious, but that friends of mine were saying they'd gone to the gym, they'd gone grocery shopping. Nothing was really out of the ordinary for them. It's just what they were seeing on the news, and that it was really bizarre. They also said that prior to this point, they loved Prigozhin. They thought he was great, but now they don't trust him. They were like, how could he do this thing? What is he doing? And that was happening in real time in Russia. The people that I spoke to also said that they blamed this debacle on the West. They felt like this was that the West had something to do with it, that they had paid Prigozhin off, and that Prigozhin was acting on the behest of basically NATO with the backing of a bunch of money. That was the sentiment that I was hearing. And that's just from average people, so take that for what you think. You know, it's just what the average Russian watching the news was kind of indicating. Everybody except for St. Petersburg. Now, we've seen some reports that, well, people in St. Petersburg were saying something different. St. Petersburg is like the San Francisco of Russia, so they always say something different. They, by and large, don't like Putin. They, by and large, it's San Francisco of Russia. So St. Petersburg is always going to be a little bit different. So we saw this whole thing unfold over the course of, 12 hours? I think the whole operation was 24 hours in total is what Prigozhin was saying. We watched this unfold. Liberal media went nuts. They were saying, oh my gosh, it's Putin is going to fall. Prigozhin's going to take over. They were championing it. They were actually championing Prigozhin. This is a paid mercenary, somebody who makes his living off of murder. And they were championing this like, this is going to be so great. He's going to finally topple Putin. I mean, it was the most bizarre thing to see people on the left, Democrats, liberals, neoliberals, championing the idea that this, it could be argued psychotic mercenary leader would be doing a hostile, undemocratic takeover of the Russian government. I mean, think about the hypocrisy here. They're all about defending democracy, and they're championing this hostile, undemocratic takeover of Russia by this mercenary who makes money off of murder. And they're thinking that he would be the great guy to have the nukes. This is the crazy world we're living in when Democrats think that's a good idea. So all of this goes to an end. Apparently, Belarus's Lukashenko, the president there, negotiates a deal, allows the Wagner Group, whoever's remaining, to go to Belarus, allows Prigozhin to go to Belarus and be there, and that's the end of it. And this was after Putin had come out saying this is treasonous, you're going to pay, this is terrible. And now, suddenly, within hours, after liberal media thinking this is finally it, the end of Putin, it's all going to go burning down, and hooray, we're going to have a military dictatorship in Russia. What could possibly go wrong? It all ends. And it was like the most anticlimactic ending, almost like when Rachel Maddow showed Trump's tax returns. Do you remember that? She built that up for however long. We're going to get those tax returns. We're going to get those tax returns. And then finally one day, aha, I got the tax returns. And it was the biggest like, wah, wah. There was nothing there after all that built up. That was kind of what happened over the weekend in Russia. Now, Prigozhin has come out with a statement. He wants everybody to know his reasons for enacting this rebellion against Russia, his own country, and he doesn't want anything to be speculated against. And so we sped this up for the interest of time, and it's been translated into English for you. This actual piece is about 11 minutes long, but we've condensed it down to 5 by speeding it up, so it might sound a little bit different. And also, the visual is an AI generation of him, so this is not actually Prigozhin. What he put out was on the platform Telegram. He started his own kind of press release Telegram channel because he wanted people to hear from him directly about what was going on with this whole debacle, with this rebellion. And so this is a voice recording that he put out on Telegram, but it's now been put on video, and it's been translated to English and sped up. So keep that in mind. Here it is. It's about 5 minutes long. This is what Prigozhin has to say for himself about the whole thing.
Today I opened the press service and received thousands of questions about the events. In order to avoid misunderstandings, I want to answer the main of these questions. First, what were the prerequisites for the March of Justice on 6/23/23? PMC Wagner is perhaps the most experienced and combat-ready unit in Russia, and possibly in the world. Motivated, charged fighters who performed a huge number of tasks in the interests of the Russian Federation, and always only in the interests of the Russian Federation, in Africa, in the Arab countries, and around the world. Recently, this unit has achieved good results in Ukraine, having completed the most serious tasks. As a result of intrigues, ill-conceived decisions, this is a division of intrigues, ill-considered decisions. This unit was to cease to exist on July 1, 1923. A council of commanders gathered, which brought all the information to the fighters. No one agreed to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense, since everyone knows very well from the current situation of their experience during the NWO that this will lead to a complete loss of combat capability. Experienced fighters, experienced commanders will simply be smeared and will actually go to the meat, where they will not be able to use their combat potential and combat experience. Those fighters who decided that they were ready to move to the Ministry of Defense did. But this is the minimum amount, calculated as a percentage of -2. All the arguments that were in order to keep PMC Wagner safe and sound were used. But none of them have been implemented in an attempt to enter into any other structure where we can really be useful. We were categorically against what they want to do. At the same time, the decision to move to the Ministry of Defense and, understanding our attitude to close Shavik Wagner, was made at the most inopportune moments. Nevertheless, we put the equipment on the grass, collected everything that was needed, made an inventory, and, if the decision was not made, we were going to leave on June 30 in a column to Rostov and publicly hand over the equipment near the headquarters of the NWO. Despite the fact that we did not show any aggression, we were hit by missiles. And immediately after that, the helicopters worked. About 30 fighters of PMC Wagner were killed. Some were injured. This prompted the Council of Commanders to immediately decide that we should move out immediately. I made a statement in which I said that we are not going to detect aggression in any way, but if we are hit, we will perceive this as an attempt to destroy and give an answer. During the entire march, which lasted 24 hours, one of the columns went to Rostov, the other in the direction of Moscow. During the day, we covered 780 kilometers. Not a single soldier on Earth was killed. We regret that we were forced to strike at air assets, but these assets dropped bombs and launched missile strikes. During the day, we covered 780 kilometers, less than 200 kilometers from Moscow. During this time, all military facilities that were along the road were blocked and neutralized. None, we repeat once again, of those who were on Earth. And this was our task. Among the fighters of PMC Wagner, several people were wounded and 2 dead, who joined us, military personnel in the Ministry of Defense, of their own free will. None of the fighters of PMC Wagner was forced to this campaign, and everyone knew his ultimate goal. The purpose of the campaign was to prevent the destruction of PMC Wagner and to bring to justice those persons who, through their unprofessional actions, made a huge number of mistakes during the SVO. It was demanded by the public. All the servicemen who saw us during the march supported us. We did not reach Moscow for about 200 kilometers, having traveled 780 kilometers in one and the other direction. We stopped at the moment when the first assault detachment, which had approached 200 kilometers to Moscow, deployed its artillery, reconnoitered the area, and it was obvious that at that moment a lot of blood would be shed. So we felt that demonstrating what we were going to do was enough. And our decision to turn around was two major factors. The first factor is that we did not want to shed Russian blood. The second factor is that we went to demonstrate our protest and not to overthrow the government in the country. At this time, Alexander Grigorievich Lukashenko extended his hand and offered to find solutions for the further work of PMC Wagner in legal jurisdiction. The columns turned back and went to the field camps. I want to point out that our march is about justice. It showed a lot of the things that we talked about earlier. Serious security problems throughout the country. We blocked all the military units of the airfield that were on our way in 24 hours. We covered the distance that corresponds to the distance from the launch site of Russian troops on February 24, 22 to Kiev and from the same point to Uzhhorod. Therefore, if the action on February 24, 22, at the time of the start of the special operation, was carried out by unit in terms of the level of training, in terms of the level of moral composure and readiness to perform tasks, like PMC Wagner, then perhaps the special operation would have lasted a day. It is clear that there were other problems, but we showed the level of organization that the Russian army must meet. And when on June 23-24 we walked past Russian cities, civilians met us with Russian flags and with emblems and flags of PMC Wagner. They were all happy when we came and when we passed by. Many of them still write words of support, and some are disappointed that we stopped. Because in the March of Justice, in addition to our struggle for existence, they saw support for the fight against bureaucracy and support for the fight against bureaucracy and other ailments that exist in our country today. These are the main questions that I can answer in order to exclude rumors both in Russian social networks and the media, and in foreign networks. So, our march we started because of injustice. We didn't kill a single soldier on the ground on the way. During the day, only 200 kilometers did not reach Moscow. They entered and completely took control of the city of Rostov. The civilians were glad to see us. We showed a masterclass on how February 24, 2022 should look like. We did not have the goal of overthrowing the existing regime and the legally elected government, which has been said many times. We turned around in order not to shed the blood of Russian soldiers.
Okay, so that might have been a little bit difficult for you to understand, but we had to speed it up because otherwise it was 11 minutes is too long. So ultimately he's saying that they did this march not because they were ever planning on overthrowing the government. He recognizes that it's a legally, democratically elected government is what he's saying, and so we weren't trying to overthrow that. He just says that they were trying to protest the end of Wagner Group. So essentially what has been going on is that there has been discussion by the Russians to bring Wagner Group into the Russians' defense forces, to make them a legitimate part of the military, to essentially absorb them into the military, which quite frankly is a good idea. You don't really want these paid mercenary groups to be fighting your wars. You don't want to be aligning with anyone whose their loyalty to your country and to your cause is secondary. They have a primary, whatever it might be. And in the case of the Wagner Group, it's money. These are paid mercenaries. They get paid really well to go out there and risk their lives and fight. They get paid better than the average person in the Russian military. So these are paid, trained mercenaries. They make money on war. That is what they do. That is what they've chosen to do as a profession rather than just joining the military, pledging their allegiance to the Russian flag, and saying that they're doing whatever they can to protect their country. That's not who this group is. So it's important to know that, this group, maybe they're Russians second. Some of them are not. Some of them are not Russians. Most of them are. But it's important to understand that Wagner Group is a group that their primary is to make money. Their secondary is Russia. But a lot of them are going all around the world fighting in all kinds of mercenary battles that they're hired to fight in. So this is kind of similar to when the United States goes to the Middle East and aligns itself with radical, like moderate rebels, right? So they're going and they're fighting terrorists, and then they arm a bunch of moderates that they say, well, they're on our side, they'll fight for us. Well, no, those moderate rebels fighting for us is secondary, right? They have their own initial reason why they want to fight. They've got their own cause. And what happens when you give weapons to a group that has a different primary cause than just the defense and the being true and being loyal to your country? If you use these other groups, they eventually can turn on you. This is what we've seen time and time again. The Middle East, these moderate rebel groups, these moderate terrorists end up being terrorists. They turn into ISIS after we give them a bunch of weapons, or we weaponized the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the late 70s and early 80s, and what happened there turns into Al-Qaeda. So it's a bad idea to arm groups of people who have a different primary objective than your primary objective. It's not a smart idea. We see this, China did this also when they were trying to battle the Soviets. What did they do in the Xinjiang region is they had a group of Muslims and they thought, you know what, why don't we import in some radical separatist ideas? They didn't really think of them as separatists at the time. They didn't develop at that time as separatists, but they did something very similar. They used the same strategy as the United States arming the Mujahideen. They did the same thing in the Xinjiang region with the Uyghurs. And they said, okay, we can bring in this kind of Islamic ideology, this Wahhabism or Salafist, really extreme form of Islam. We'll bring it in, convert them to that, and they'll fight the Soviets for us. We won't have to pick up any arms. Eventually, what happens? That group then rises up because their primary objective is not defending China against the Russians, against the Soviets. They have a different primary objective. And so ultimately they turn on you. This is what we've seen. That's what China learned that lesson with the Uyghurs when they were arming them. Russia is learning that lesson right now with Wagner Group. The United States learned that. Well, we should have learned that lesson. I'm not sure if we really learned that lesson, but we should have learned that lesson when we armed the Mujahideen and they turned out to be Al-Qaeda. These are the lessons you should learn. Don't arm a group of people whose primary objective is not the same as yours. Stick to your own. And Russia was, it seems, they'd figured that out, and they were wanting to absorb Wagner Group into the Russian Defense Forces. This was obviously threatening to Prigozhin. He doesn't want to end his Wagner Group. He's happy having this mercenary force that he's making money off of, being independent and having that kind of power. So he had begun resisting this, this attempt from the Russian, well, successful ultimately now. As of today, Wagner Group is operational in Belarus, so they're allowed to go. Part of the negotiation, the deal of them leaving Russia and turning around was those that want to stay in the Wagner Group can stay in the Wagner Group. They need to reside in Belarus. Those who wanted to be absorbed into the Russian Federation, the Russian Defense Forces, and be able to freely travel and be home to their families in Russia, needed to join the defense forces or go home and no longer fight at all. Those were their options. So if you're in the Wagner Group and this whole debacle happens, you had three choices. One, retire, go home, and Russia will allow you to do that. Two, join the Russian Defense Forces, join the military, no more being this mercenary. Or three, go away, don't come back, go to Belarus, do not come back, stay there and continue on with what you're doing. Those were their choices. So ultimately, Russia got what they wanted. They ultimately were able to disband Wagner Group effectively, and now they'll be fighting their own battles as the Russian Defense Forces. But obviously, Prigozhin gave them a fight and didn't like this idea. And he was saying in that video, he says, look, they wanted to get rid of us, but we're the good fighters. They wanted us to go and work for the Russian Defense Forces, but it's a debacle. Look at them. Their leadership sucks. They're untrained. We would have been sent to the meat grinder, he says. He says, they're missing out on an opportunity. Wagner's stronger. We're better. Look at what we were able to accomplish. We were able to march and take over one city and march within 200 kilometers of Moscow, plus taking military strategic points and ammunition depots or whatnot along the way. We're able to take those over along the way. And he says, had we been in charge from the beginning of this special military operation, February of 2022, it would have been over in a matter of days. See how quickly we could have gotten to Moscow? We could have done that, and it would have been done. In a matter of days, the special operation would have been over had we been in charge. So we're more competent. We don't want to be absorbed into the stupid military run by idiots, is basically what Prigozhin's saying. And so we were protesting, and that's what we were doing. But when it looked like we were going to get fired on, we were going to be attacked, there was going to be a lot of bloodshed, we decided to turn around. And that's when we made the deal with Lukashenko helping out. And now we're going to operate out of Belarus, some of us. Others are going to go to the Russian Defense Forces or go home. That is how this whole thing went down. Now, Putin had something to say about this, and I'm going to go into more as to why this was an extortion attempt, because there's a lot of history there, and I do believe that Prigozhin walked away with billions of dollars. But here is Putin, well, there's actually the video, first of all, because one thing also that Prigozhin says is one of his reasons for doing this was that they were being fired upon by Moscow. He was saying that we were fine. We weren't going to cause any, we were going to protest, but there wasn't going to be any bloodshed. But then Moscow decides to start firing on us. So here's his a video that they put out of the evidence that Russia had been firing missiles at Wagner Group, trying to attack their own.
Ебать. Пидорасы. Ща, брат, подожди.
Okay, so it's unclear. I mean, that, he's claiming, Prigozhin and Wagner Group is claiming that the Russians struck them. Russia was claiming it was British missiles. Ukraine says it wasn't us. That's what we know. So it's hard to know. It is very possible that Russia did actually strike. And the reason is because there had been previous knowledge, it turns out. We're learning that Russia did know that Wagner was going to attempt this sort of uprising. And so maybe Russia was putting an end to it before it could begin, trying to say, like, don't you even dare. That is very possible because it did turn into a pretty big-looking debacle that now the West is using, saying, see, Russia is weaker, and perhaps maybe Russia is a bit weaker in this, losing Prigozhin and losing the leadership of the Wagner Group and losing quite a few fighters in that Wagner Group, well-trained, the best fighters that they have in Russia in this mercenary group. Now, Putin did come out with a statement. This is what he had to say.
Dear friends, today I once again appeal to all citizens of Russia. Thank you for your endurance, unity and patriotism. This civic solidarity has shown that any blackmail, attempts to arrange internal unrest, are doomed to failure. I repeat, the highest consolidation of society, executive and legislative power at all levels was shown. A firm, unambiguous position in support of the constitutional order was taken by public organizations, religious denominations, and leading political parties. In fact, the entire Russian society. Everyone was united and rallied by the main thing, responsibility for the fate of the fatherland. I emphasize that from the very beginning of the events, all the necessary decisions were immediately taken to neutralize the threat that had arisen, to protect the constitutional order, the life and security of our citizens. An armed rebellion would have been suppressed in any case. The organizers of the rebellion, despite the loss of adequacy, could not fail to understand this. They understood everything, including the fact that they went to criminal actions, to split and weaken the country, which is now confronting a colossal external threat, unprecedented pressure from outside, when our comrades are dying at the front, with the words, "Not one step back." However, the organizers of the rebellion, betraying their country, their people, betrayed those who were involved in crimes, lied to them, pushed them to death under fire, to shoot at their own. It was precisely this outcome that the enemies of Russia and the neo-Nazis in Kiev, and their Western patrons, and all sorts of national traitors wanted. They wanted Russian soldiers to kill each other, so that military personnel and civilians would die, so that Russia would ultimately lose. And our society has split, choked into a bloody civil strife. They lost their arms, dreaming of taking revenge for their failures at the front and during the so-called counter-offensive. But they miscalculated. I thank all our military personnel, law enforcement officers, special services who stood in the way of the rebels, remained faithful, duty, oath and their people. The courage and self-sacrifice of the fallen heroes' pilots saved Russia from tragic destructive consequences. At the same time, we knew and we know that the overwhelming majority of the fighters and commanders of the Wagner Group are also Russian patriots, devoted to their people and state. They proved it with their courage on the battlefield, liberating the Donbass and Novorossiya. They tried to use them in the dark, against their brothers in arms, with whom they fought together for the sake of the country and its future. Therefore, from the very beginning of the events, on my direct instructions, steps were taken to avoid a lot of bloodshed. This took time, including to give those who made a mistake a chance to think again, to understand that their actions are resolutely rejected by society and what tragic, destructive consequences for Russia, for our state, the adventure in which they were dragged leads. I thank those soldiers and commanders of the Wagner Group who made the only right decision. They did not go to fratricidal bloodshed, they stopped at the last line. Today you have the opportunity to continue serving Russia by entering into a contract with the Ministry of Defense or other law enforcement agencies. Or return to your family and friends. Whoever wants can go to Belarus. The promise I made will be fulfilled. I repeat, the choice is yours. No, but I am sure that this will be the choice of Russian soldiers who have realized their tragic mistake. I am grateful to the President of Belarus Alexander Grigoryevich Lukashenko for his efforts and contribution to the peaceful resolution of the situation. Let me repeat, it was the patriotic mood of the citizens, the consolidation of the entire Russian society that played a decisive role these days. This support allowed us to overcome the most difficult trials for our motherland together. Thank you for that. Thank you.
So what's really interesting about this is, Wagner Group was marching and taking over cities in Russia, marching onto Moscow, threatening. 13 airmen were killed after seven planes or aircraft were shot down. And Putin is saying to them, listen, you guys made a grave mistake. I'm going to let you correct your mistake. And you can either go home to your families, join the Russian Defense Forces, or go to Belarus. That is such a different way of handling this, especially for somebody that the West is always saying is a brutal dictator who rules this country with an iron fist. Look at the difference between how this insurrection was handled and the January 6th insurrection, so-called insurrection here in the United States. Very different way of handling it. Putin actually handled it with a lot of compassion for these mercenaries who he's just saying, you made a bad decision. I'm going to forgive you for your decision, but here are your choices now. So choose and let's move on with our lives. Very, very different. He does, though, however, blame. So he says, look, a lot of you got taken advantage of. You were naive. And so, we're just going to chalk this up as a big mistake. Obviously, Prigozhin is now exiled into Belarus. But Putin also, interestingly, in his statement, points out the West and says, he blames the West for part of this rebellion. And this is where it gets interesting. So he's saying, I think the West was behind this. They are trying to make up for the fact that they have a failed counteroffensive and things are not going very well. So they clearly had something to do with this. And we'll get into exactly how they maybe did. But first, here's Biden, Joe Biden, coming out and saying, we didn't have anything to do with it. This is what he has to say.
Before I begin, let me say a few words about the events in Russia. Excuse, I'm a little of an allergy. The situation began to develop as it did. I directed my national security team to monitor closely and report to me hour by hour. I instructed them to prepare for a range of scenarios. I also convened our key allies on a Zoom call to make sure we're all on the same page. It's critical that we're coordinated in our response and coordinated in what we're to anticipate. They agreed with me that we had to make sure we gave Putin no excuse. Let me emphasize, we gave Putin no excuse to blame this on the West or to blame this on NATO. We made clear that we were not involved. We had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system. I also talked at length with President Zelensky of Ukraine. I'll be keeping in contact with him. I may be peeking him later today or early tomorrow morning to make sure we continue to remain on the same page. I told him that no matter what happened in Russia, let me say it again, no matter what happened in Russia.
Yeah, so he's saying we didn't have anything to do with it, but there's some evidence that maybe they did actually have something to do with it. So let's kind of start back at the beginning of how this extortion plot unfolded, because I do believe this was an extortion plot and not some sort of rebellion or attempted coup against Russia. I think that Prigozhin is a man that's out for money. Again, he fights wars for money. He's in it for the money. And I think he wanted money when he realized that Wagner Group was no longer going to survive. And I think he got potentially a lot of it in the process. So when you go back to the beginning of the year, there was talks that the Russian military wanted to absorb Wagner into their forces. And this obviously started a bit of a war between Prigozhin and the Russian defense forces. And Prigozhin started making a lot of claims like, we're not getting the ammunition we want, we're not being supported. He started being much more vocal in his angst and his anger towards the Russian defense forces. So here, this was February 23rd. There's this, it says here, Russian warlords feud with Putin's generals explodes into the open with a gruesome PR campaign. And what had happened was that this is kind of similar to the video, which we'll get to, of Prigozhin saying, look at all the dead bodies. We're being slaughtered out here because we don't have enough ammunition. He did that originally back in February. He posted a photograph on Telegram showing bodies of several dozens of Wagner fighters piled up in a courtyard. And he said, that, you know, look at what's going on. We're being slaughtered. We're not getting enough ammunition. So he's pointing the finger squarely at Russia saying, this is your fault. This is why we're dying. Give us ammunition or else. Then shortly after, a couple of weeks after, this is early March, Wagner reportedly opens up some mercenary recruitment centers at Russian sports clubs. And this is after the Russian government pretty much had already told Wagner, we intend to absorb you into our military. We don't want a mercenary force fighting on our behalf that can then use this to their advantage, extort us for money. Like, there's a bunch of things you can do as a mercenary group. We want to be in control of the entire operation, and we don't want to have the military and this mercenary force. So they were trying to absorb them in. Nonetheless, Wagner Group sets up these recruitment forces and says, oh yeah, well, we're just going to recruit more people. We need people. So defiantly, Prigozhin sets up these recruitment centers. Interestingly, about a week after that, Prigozhin announces his desire to run for president. He says, that's it, I've had it. So this battle has been going on. You know, he's like angry at the Russian government. He's angry with Putin. He's angry with the defense forces. And he's saying defiantly, I'm going to recruit more troops. And then what are you going to do about it when I've got the force and you don't? What are you going to do about it then when I control the government and I'm president of Russia? So he announces he's going to run for president. Then we see some reports, you know, there's this back and forth between them. And clearly Wagner Group is really angry. Clearly Prigozhin is angry. Then April 30th, we see that he puts out again more information saying that we're no longer going to exist if you keep preventing us from getting ammunition. In reality, what was going on is they were going to be absorbed into the Russian military, and he's saying, and that's why they would no longer exist, not because they're not getting the ammunition, but because they're going to be absorbed. But also, it is looking like now that Moscow was holding back ammunition from the Wagner Group. It does look like now that we've seen everything unfold that they were trying to reduce their footprint. They were trying to phase them out. And part of that phasing out was reducing ammunition. And Prigozhin was using that. I'm sure Moscow was very measured and calculated in how they were doing it. I'm sure they were not withholding ammunition to where those soldiers would end up dead. But Prigozhin was saying, they're ending up dead because you're withholding the ammunition. And Moscow was probably saying, no, we're withholding ammunition because we're trying to move everything into the actual military and move you into the actual military. Then shortly after that, so you got Prigozhin really angry, and this is late April. So all throughout February, March, and April, he's really, really angry. Then we see these drone attacks on Moscow, right? And I was always skeptical of these attacks. This is when everybody was saying, oh, look at Ukraine has gotten this close to the Kremlin. They've got these little drones. The drones, for one, were not really, they didn't cause any real damage. They're not harmful drones. They got really close to the Kremlin. I was very skeptical of this idea that this was Ukraine or even forces friendly to Ukraine. I even mentioned at the time that this happened that maybe it was Wagner Group, because maybe they were angry and sending a message like, hey, we can get to the Kremlin. We can get close to the Kremlin, which they, again, did over the weekend, right? So Now this calls into question who did the drone attack. Was it Wagner? Have they been trying to send messages all along, as they've had with images of and videos of dead bodies, and we can get you, we're the ones who truly are in charge, we're the ones who really are powerful, and look at how close we can get to the Kremlin. Now we've got a day after the drone attack on the Kremlin. This is all starting to make sense. Now a day later, Prigozhin puts out this video, and this is a video where, again, he's angry. He did this in February with the images, but now he's doing it with the video. He's angry and he's saying, look at all these dead soldiers. Look at this.
Вот это вот парни ЧВК «Вагнер», которые погибли сегодня. Еще кровь свежая. Сними всех. А теперь слушайте меня, сука, блядь. Это чьи-то, блядь, отцы и чьи-то сыновья. И те, которые не дают нам боеприпасы, сука, будут в аду жрать их потроха, блядь. У нас нехватка боеприпасов 70%. Шойгу, Герасимов, где боеприпасы? Посмотрите на них, сука! Если вы даете норму боеприпасов, их в 5 раз меньше. Они пришли сюда добровольцами и умирают за то, чтобы вы жировали в своих кабинетах с красным деревом. Учтите это!
Okay, so that was one day after the drone attacks on the Kremlin, which really didn't do any damage, but maybe they were just meant to send a message. And then he sends this other message in this video. Then we hear reports in middle of May. If you remember this, the Washington Post came out saying that the Wagner chief offered to give Russian troop locations to Ukraine, according to those leaked documents by Jack Teixeira, Airman Jack Teixeira. They said they were able to see more of these documents. And in those documents, they saw that in January, there were reports from the Ukrainian intelligence that Prigozhin was offering to sell Russian troop locations, essentially, and that they had said, we don't trust you, so we're not taking the bait. Whether or not they did is, of course, they're going to say, well, no, you didn't, because they're going to want to keep their source protected if he is helping them out. But Prigozhin came out and said, oh, this is categorically false. I would never do that. It's a bunch of bull crap. But now that we're putting all the pieces together, maybe he really did. And it may be, and now I don't really think that Prigozhin is against Russia. I don't think that he ever would have really done anything to be against Russia. I don't think he really truly ever was aligning with NATO or the West. I just think it was a negotiation tactic for either one of two things, either for Wagner Group to continue to exist in the way that they were, or for him to at least get a giant payout to walk away, one of the two things. And he was angry about the whole situation, and he was using all of this as a negotiation tactic. That's what it looks like to me. So we see these reports that in January he was selling information, offering to sell information, probably was, and then saying to Russia, see what I could do to you, give me my money, or stop trying to harm us, or else, right? So this is like extortion in a way. So that he denies it. Now we go to June 20th of this, just a few days before the whole, the whole insurrection or whatever. And the Pentagon announces that $6.2 billion were suddenly found. That, it was just an accounting error. We were just kind of looking back through 2022 and looking back through 2023, and we found that we had inflated the cost of some of the equipment, and we didn't, and so magically we found $6.2 billion. That, by the way, we can do whatever we want with. So, you just magically found $6.2 billion. And remember, Prigozhin is sanctioned by the United States. So if you're going to give him some bribery money, you're going to have to do it on the DL somehow, right? So they just found this extra money, and so where does that money go? We don't know. But interestingly, they find $6.2 billion. And interestingly, a couple days later, Prigozhin goes and marches on towards Moscow. Coincidence? After he potentially said he would sell Russian troop locations, he then goes on these rants. There's another rant. We've got another one of him Do we have his rant of him saying it's not the Donbass? This was the same day. He releases this video on the day. Maybe he made this video the day before he goes and takes his march towards Moscow. But he releases this video and he says that everything's a lie. He basically adopts the NATO's stance on everything. And he says Ukraine wasn't shelling Donbass. Russians are lying, and the special military operation is just a sham. Like, there's no need to actually do this. Russia's a big liar. Watch this video.
By why the special operation began. The Ukrainians had a grouping that was located along the borders from the territory of Donbass, just the one that we laid from the post to Artemovsk. This group consisted of various voluntary, let's say, nationalist formations, and also consisted of the active army of the armed forces of Ukraine.
This group exchanged shots. We hit them, they hit us. And this happened all these long 8 years, 14 to 20 years.
Sometimes the number of different skirmishes increased, the group talking, exchanging ammunition, exchanging shots, sometimes decreasing. On February 24, there was nothing extraordinary. Now the Ministry of Defense is already trying to deceive the public, trying to deceive the president and tell the story that there was insane aggression on the part of Ukraine and they were going to attack us together with the entire NATO regiment. Therefore, the special operation, the so-called February 24, she began for completely different reasons. So now the army. The army began from the 12th year. It all started earlier with Serdyukov.
But starting from the 12th year, when he sent Shoigu, the army did nothing.
Each conscript was given 3 rounds of ammunition, as in the worst Soviet times, although this was not the case in Soviet times either. They were not engaged in combat training. They were not trained in various types of weapons, especially modern ones. And therefore, in Russia, the army was in such a flawed state that it could not have any compromising military operations everywhere. Shameful companies like the Syrian one, where PMCs performed the main task, and the army men flew on planes absolutely shameful boorish things that we did in Syria, such as crossing the borders of neighboring states on planes, about which all the commanders repeatedly warned Sheyeva and Gerasimov. They did not give the army any combat experience. A huge number of generals assured themselves like a Christmas tree with the stars of the hero of the Russian Federation, most of which never went anywhere in their lives. Heroes of Russia received simply for the fact that once on a comfortable plane with a leather interior and a natural table, the general flew from Moscow towards Khmelnytsia and returned back. For this they received the star of the hero of the Russian Federation. The titles actually discredited, destroyed this title. Clowns, who walked all day and licked the ass of the Minister of Defense and his retinue, they received the following military ranks of all patronymics and awards.
The puck soldier has ceased to exist as a creature that can say at least some word, whose opinion can be heard.
Therefore, absolutely absent training in the army, lack of command, lack of weapons and many other factors met the Russian army on February 24, 1919.
The entire operation was kept secret.
And kept it a secret.
So there he is saying, he's touting the Western narrative on this one. And ultimately, I think that everyone just got played by Prigozhin. This is like he talks about a master class in what Wagner Group could have done in the early days of the march and of the special operation when they were surrounding Kiev. And he says this was a master class, what we could have done. We made it to Kiev, we made it to Moscow within 200 kilometers, and we could have been there. And I think the guy actually showed us a master class on how to extort multiple nations into giving you billions of dollars. We now find out from the Washington Post, they're reporting that U.S. spies learned of Prigozhin's plan in mid-June. So this is why I think the U.S. gave him the $6.2 billion or something, some portion of that amount of money, is that apparently they're reporting, well, we knew about this plan. Yeah, how did you know about the plan? Did you know about the plan because you were able to bribe off Prigozhin and give him $6 billion bucks? And then you got played in the end. I mean, you look like an idiot, right? If you're NATO right now, if you're the West, you look like a moron because you potentially gave this guy some money, potentially billions of dollars. And he does this like fake march on Moscow, and it really amounts to nothing. And then as soon as Putin says, okay, fine, maybe Putin says, all right, will allow you to continue operating in Belarus rather than totally disbanding Wagner Group. You can continue to operate in Belarus, and we'll match their $6 billion, or maybe we'll give you $12 billion, or however many billions of dollars you think you need in order to compensate you because your business is being shut down. So the West really didn't get to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish, which I'm sure they were sitting there thinking, if they were involved in this, they're thinking, all right, we got Prigozhin. He's been trying to negotiate with us since January, he's been turning on Putin since January, when in reality, Prigozhin is just negotiating. These are his negotiation tactics. He says to Moscow, I can sell Russian troop locations. See how easy it is? He says, I can go on, make videos and say that you guys are killing us and make the Russian people turn against you. Possibly, it didn't work. Then he says, okay, well, I can go on video and say that you're a big liar and give the West a bunch of ammunition, because now the West is thrilled over Prigozhin's announcement that all of it was a lie. Russia's lying. So the West is running with that. And Prigozhin knows that. He knows that's going to upset Putin. It's going to upset the Russian government if NATO gets their hands on, if the West gets their hands on narratives that they can run with in the media. It's annoying to the Russian, to Putin and to Moscow. So Prigozhin, I believe, was using all of this as a really intelligent negotiation tactic to keep Wagner Group somewhat operational, and now they're going to be in Belarus, and probably to make some billions of dollars off of the idiots in NATO in his mind, and also off of Russia that probably paid him off with even more money. So potentially this was a grand extortion plot. That's what it's looking like. Nothing else really seems to make sense. He clearly was not intending on taking over the Russian government. If so, why march in with all your military equipment? Why take over towns? If you're just protesting, then just march and protest, right? Lay down your arms and say, that's it, we're done, we're protesting. But instead, stages this kind of march like a threat. We can get really close to Moscow. What are you going to do about it? And ultimately got Putin to come to some sort of an agreement that he found to be something that he liked. So we're also finding out from sources, not sure how reliable these sources are, but they're saying that the Wagner Group was stockpiling ammunition, that they actually did not have an ammunition shortage like they claimed, but that they were actually stockpiling this for a couple of months. And that was like the reality of it. But so that's very possible. It's possible that they were doing that and all of this was a negotiation tactic. At the end of the day, Wagner Group was going to be disbanded. Prigozhin knew that, didn't like it, was trying to do something to save his company or get a big payout, or both in the end. And I think he got that. So that is what I believe happened over this weekend. It was not an insurrection. It was not some sort of, big rebellion. This was a masterclass at extortion and negotiation tactics. And everybody kind of won on this one. I mean, Russia got what they wanted. They absorbed Wagner Group into the Russian Defense Forces. Wagner got what they wanted. They're still operational out of Belarus, and I'm sure Prigozhin got billions of dollars. And actually, the West kind of got what they wanted too, which was a narrative. They get to go on TV and now say, this makes Putin look weak. Look at what happened to, look at his insurrection. Now they get to say Russia is torn in two. They get to run with this narrative. So it looks like from this thing, everybody won. And that is my assessment of the situation, but I'm sure it is not over. Unfortunately, it would be nice if this war was over, but it is not. So I'm sure there'll be more to come and more things that we'll be learning about as the time, but it's war, things are crazy, and things continue to be crazy. All right. If you struggle to get a good night's sleep, if you're dealing with too much stress and could use a little calm in your life, if you suffer with pain and discomfort, especially after physical exercise, you should try CBD products from the source I prefer, cbdistillery.com. They extract healing plant compounds and vital nutrients for your whole body. No artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, or sweeteners. Just 100% clean ingredients. 90% of customers reported they sleep better with CBD. 81% said CBD helps them with stress. 80% said CBD helps with aches and pains after physical activity. So head to cbdistillery.com and you'll get 20% off your order when you enter my name, Kim, at checkout. No prescription required. That is cbdistillery.com, promo code Kim for 20% off. All right.